What is good, everybody? We're glad you're here. I am Joey Powell. This is the Coast to Coast podcast on InsideCarolina.com. We're brought to you by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. With me, as always, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran. Y'all know the deal. Sherrell and Sean are here to drop the knowledge on us, help us understand how to make heads or tails of what's going on in the world of UNC basketball. Shout out to everybody who's joining us live tonight. But if you're listening to us later on, hey, we're glad you're making us part of your podcast rotation. Just make sure that you are downloading appropriately, or you could just subscribe and have it automatically show up in your feed. So, with that being said, we're going to get things rolling here, giving you a recap of the Tar Heels from last week. Tar Heels split the week, got beat by 20 at Clemson in a game that probably wasn't as close as the score indicated, and then held on at Syracuse on Saturday. We're able to outlast the Orange 88-82. I think first things first, this seems more of what we've come to know of this team. They're incredibly inconsistent. But what I will say is that where it looked as if they may not have had any heart and seemingly quit against Clemson, they did not cave against Syracuse after the Orange came back and tied the game. So, Sherrell McMillan, I'm going to ask you first while I try to deal with stupid audio garbage. I'm going to ask you first, does this feel like more of the same, or is maybe there's something that we picked out from the Syracuse game that we can carry forward? Stop me if you've heard this before. Go ahead.
No, the only thing you can carry forward is that they're playing teams who aren't great. And so you would expect if you play the same way you play against good teams and you lose, then if you play that same way against bad teams, then you should win. So, I mean, maybe like their inconsistency is consistent now that the schedule is going to be backloaded with bad teams here for the next couple of weeks before they get to Duke. But I don't think there's nothing to learn at this point. You're 26 games into the season. You are what your record says you are. Whatever cliche you want to use, like you are what your record says you are. You're not going to get better. You are what you are. Like all that stuff applies. So you give them credit for pulling out a win. And I don't want to do this the rest of the podcast where we say, but it was against Syracuse. Because, yes, we all know Syracuse is not a good team. So they pulled out a win. If we're going to yell at them and call them names when they lose by 20 and look like they don't give great effort against Clemson, then we have to acknowledge that they picked themselves up off the mat and beat Syracuse. But from a larger picture, it doesn't really change anything. This team is inconsistent, and this team will continue to be inconsistent, even though they might stack together some wins. I don't think you can materially change who you are within a couple of days. So that's where I'm at. Good win, had to have it, and now you move on to Wednesday. Joey is muted. We can't hear him. So I'll step in for a second. Sean, just kind of your thoughts on your take on where UNC is 1-1 for the week, lost to Clemson. Like, does anything change, or is it like we think?
No. I mean, I fully agree with what you said in terms of where they're at. Although I think they could have easily quit going into the Syracuse game, and we talked about it. There were some matchup difficulties, and Syracuse does have some individually talented players. So going up to upstate New York, coming off the Clemson loss, and it could have gone the other way. And last year UNC had a tough time up there. So in terms of does it change anything for the season? No, but in terms of offensively, it was nice to see them clicking outside of those first, say six or so minutes in the first half. And as I was just going through the score sheet from the first and second halves, I think there was only 3 times, mostly at the beginning of that first half, where they went three or more possessions without scoring. And I think I kind of wish I had tracked that throughout the season, because I think that's probably been one of the more frustrating aspects, is seeing those long scoring droughts that they go through. But on the flip side, they went numerous times, whereas 3+ possession scoring points in a row. You thought maybe with some of that offensive surplus that they would have had a larger lead or been able to not depend on an Elliot Cadeau layup with 30 seconds left to clinch it. But I think the offensive consistency was something that I did enjoy seeing, and I think it also maybe allowed me and others just to think the what if. From a scoring perspective, every game there's been so much pressure on R.J. Davis and Ian Jackson to put up a scoring load, and obviously we'd seen the last early season when R.J. was struggling, the last 4 or 5 games when Ian was struggling, but to have a third scoring threat was very nice, and I think took some pressure off of them, but also made them a lot more dangerous. Now, can going back to maybe week 4 or 5, where Withers had a few good weeks in him, you're not going to be able to depend on that every game. I think he made that first shot and got a lot more confident. And against the Syracuse defense, it was a little easier to get open looks. But I think that shows if you had a consistent third scoring threat, maybe where things could be a little bit different right now for UNC.
I think you're onto something, Sean. And I hope y'all can hear me actually now. So sorry for stupid technology. Sean, I think you're onto something, because what we saw against Syracuse was actually the way this offense was supposed to work, with a 4-man being able to step out, hit perimeter shots, which, again, like you were saying, takes pressure off of your guards. I don't know that necessarily you could have relied on Jae'Lyn Withers to do that all season. But he did show up against Syracuse. He did do the things that the 4-man in this year's offense was supposed to do. He still had the foul issues, which you'll take that considering what he gave you offensively. I'm going to ask you guys now, do you feel like this has to be the way they go the rest of the year, if nothing else, just to give you some more height? I'm not saying Withers has to start, but do you have to rotate him in more, if nothing else, just to try to cover up for some of the gaping holes they have on the front line? Sean?
I think you like the height that they had, and maybe from a more normalized position perspective. I know they still went short with the 3 guards, but I think it does allow, especially when Drake is in the game, to have some size at that 3-4 to obviously the 5 to an extent, but it can balance off maybe some of the shortcomings of the 1 and 2 or the 5. I think we've seen all the different lineup changes. We've seen the Withers consistency, but once again, I think to his credit, he did hit that shot. He did feel, I think, a lot more confident. Now, at the start of the second half, there was a lot of defensive miscues. Obviously, one where he completely fell asleep on the sideline out of bounds, but then a few others where early on it might have been somebody else's fault, but when going back and looking, you could point the blame at Withers. So there's definitely a lot of still mental lapses on defense, but I think that, and once again, it's a little easier with the zone, but I think with offensive rebounding that they did have, it was finally a strong offensive rebounding game. Some were tap outs, which I think the team can still do without their size, and it just did help extend possessions. One, RJ got a 3 off of an offensive rebound. So it just goes to what we were highlighting last week, have been talking about for a majority of the season. You get those extra shots, those extra possessions, especially for a team that isn't great shooting or isn't that strong at stringing together consecutive possessions. So I think from a height perspective, it helped. And if you can slot, once again, I think juggling the lineups is key. If Elliot Cadeau is not playing well, having more RJ. But once again, I think the ceiling is limited. But if you can be playing at least to the maximum efficiency, then it's a little more enjoyable to watch.
So Sherrell and I were texting during the game. Hang on, go ahead, Sherrell, if you want to throw something else in on that.
No, I don't want to be like Sherrell Raincloud here, but like everybody forgets, maybe because it was 5 days, they started the same lineup against Clemson and got blown out. So like, yes, Clemson's a much better team than Syracuse, but I don't want us to think that this lineup is like some magic elixir that's going to cure all of the ills. It helps because, we all have our various conversations offline, but like Sean was talking about how it allowed Drake Powell to play some 3, and he's, I don't know if the numbers bear it out. It just anecdotally feels like he's just helps the team so much more at the 3. And then Joey, you can now continue about our conversation offline.
Well, so I was more, not necessarily that Withers should start, but does Hubert have to give him more minutes? Because he got 17 minutes against Clemson, and then yesterday against Syracuse, he played significantly more and probably limited himself. He was the only one that limited his own minutes because of foul trouble, and he played 24 against Syracuse. But I think both of your points are standing ones, and we can build off of those. So, Sherrell, you and I were texting during the game against Syracuse, and you can add this to the list of the completely absurd in the sense North Carolina makes North Carolina shoots 13 of 28 from behind the stripe against Syracuse, and they do so in a dome. Help me make sense of that. Is that just more of the catastrophic inconsistency that we've seen all year? Because you always hear shooters say it's harder to shoot in the dome because of depth perception. North Carolina has been maddeningly bad from behind the arc this year. And then all of a sudden against Syracuse, who did not play zone the entire game, it seems like everybody on the team wanted to get in on the act, and guys were just throwing daggers from anywhere on the floor. Make that make sense to me, please, sir.
The only thing I can think of is that, again, Syracuse is not a great defensive team. So maybe there's a little, those closeouts aren't as strong, and the people closing out aren't as tall or as athletic or as motivated as perhaps some of the teams that UNC played earlier this year. Withers, we've seen him go on a streak like this before. I think Kansas, and there was maybe one other game where he hit 2 or 3, and you're just like, what is happening? So it just happened to coincide with Ian Jackson, who had, I guess he had 17 points the previous 4 games and had 23 in this one. He makes 5 of his 10 threes. And then RJ has 2 that probably shouldn't have went in that go in just because he gets the shooter's role. So maybe some of that negative luck, I don't know if that's a phrase or not, negative luck or going back to the mean happened for RJ. Withers got hot and Jackson got hot. And that kind of explains why they shot so well. Because I think between those 3, that's 10 of the 13 made threes. 5, I'm doing some quick math. 5 plus 3 plus 3 is 11. So that's 11 of the 13. Now, I can't remember. I think Powell hit 1. I don't know who made the 13th, but
he had one naked. Jae'Lyn Washington. How are you hating on
Washington.
Washington's deep prowess? The best shooting big man Hubert Davis has ever seen.
And I think last year, didn't he make 2 against Syracuse in the Smith Center? So maybe it's just something about the way Syracuse plays defense. But I think it's a combination of all that, of RJ getting some shooting luck that he's been due for. Ian got hot and Jae'Lyn got hot in the same game.
Well, I think, again, at this point, North Carolina and folks who root for the program will absolutely take it. Sean, I couldn't help but think about you when the Tar Heels hit that magic number 8 in the first half. You're kind of sitting around scratching your heads, wondering what the magic elixir is of this particular evening, but it happens anyway. Sean, I want to ask you, what's up with Ian Jackson? I think you saw a guy who and through his own comments post-game, and I think we've said it some, that people started to figure out how to guard him, and they were throwing some different things at him, whether it was short doubles, whether it was just they were bodying him more outside of the paint and making him work harder to get open. Either way, he had struggled mightily in his last 2 games against Pittsburgh and Clemson. All of a sudden, against Syracuse, he comes in and immediately jumps out and strips the net on the first one he takes. You always like to see your shooters hit the first one they take because it just immediately takes their confidence from 0 to off the charts, and you'd love to start in that place. How do you think North Carolina can find ways to get him engaged early? Because what you saw is after he made that shot, shortly thereafter he gets his hands in the passing lane, steals the ball, goes down, gets a dunk, and from then it's just Katie bar the door. So how can North Carolina continue to focus on getting him engaged early? Is it drawing up plays for him? Is it making sure that he's attacking the basket so he can go to the free throw line? He's not a great free throw shooter, but those types of things may plug him in. What would you recommend to help maintain the sort of effort you got out of him on both ends against Syracuse?
Yeah, I thought he definitely gave a strong effort on both ends, and I think to your point, that first shot that he hit, he was open, but a good contest, and then he, in terms of making a move to take a shot. And he hit it, and I think that played a big difference, especially the struggles over the past few games. But to me, my favorite basket from him was I think it was the third basket where it was Seth Trimble on the fast break missed the layup, and Ian Jackson got the tip in. And I think it was just a possession or two before there was a transition, and some of the guys they weren't running full speed, let alone half speed. And on that play, you saw Trimble start out well ahead of the field, but you saw Jackson take off immediately and give 100%, and he was rewarded with the rebound and a follow-up. And I think it's that type of mental focus in terms of getting yourself some easy baskets, other looks, but having that focus throughout and not relying on Trimble to make that shot. So I think it's almost a mix of Ian having a little more focus everywhere, which can open things up for him, and then at the same time, whether it's the coaching staff or the team, continue to look for him and try to get him open shots where he's not having to take contested shots or shots at the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 at the shot clock. So I liked his shot mix that he did have, and once again, I think when he does have the ball in his hands, he's the best player at being able to break down a defense that UNC does have. And I think like any freshman, you're going to go through a rough stretch. He just went through a very rough one, especially offensively, given that's what his focus is. But the more that he can get some easy baskets to mix in with some open shots, that can offset even if those open shots aren't going in early on.
Sean, do you remember him being like that when you saw him as a prep recruit? Was he one of those guys that he had to hit his first one to be on fire? I know the level of competition is different, but he's always seemed mentally like he was. And again, we've said on the show he's a certified bucket, trademark, but it seemed just night and day different from how engaged he was. Again, not just scoring, but just how engaged he was in being in the right spots and having active hands and stuff. Was he like that on the recruiting trail?
No, as you said, he offense, putting the ball in the basket was his main trademark. So a guy like that is not going to let, if the first shot doesn't go in, he was if the second, third, fourth, fifth, like he was still going to attack and try to put the ball in the basket. Obviously a little more challenging with college defenses. So even if he had missed that shot, I think if he was in the flow of the game, maybe he might not have had as great of a game. But once again, going back to that third basket that he did have, or even the second basket where it was a result of his own defensive ability on that possession, he was able to force the action a little bit in a good way. So once again, I think for him, it's just continuing to stay engaged, trying to take good shots. That was always the question mark was, what percentage is he going to shoot from three? And I know he started out hot in the ACC. He's down a little bit to 33%, but I think it's just trying to take higher quality shots and continuing to be more engaged versus, say, Jae'Lyn Withers. If he had missed that first shot, he's probably not having that game that he did yesterday.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I don't see Jay Witt coming back from pulling a string on a corner three, missing it. He's had that issue this year, and all of a sudden it's just he's afraid to shoot. I don't think you're going to get that out of Ian Jackson at any point in time. Sherrell, I saw another game in both situations, both against Clemson and Syracuse, where it felt like Elliot Cadeau would do a lot of magical things and then would just do a lot of things that really kill the offense. And I don't know how really to explain that other than the fact that he's just a high-risk, high-reward player. I think he would probably be better served if North Carolina had a higher tempo team, because I think that's where he thrives. But is there anything he can do to maybe dial back the lasers going to Van Allen Lubin in the post? Is there anything he can do to – is that just who North Carolina has at this point? Is that really just how his game's going to fit with this roster?
Yeah, I mean, we're like I say, we're at game 26. The season is basically over. So I just
try to have a show here, pal. Work with me.
No. I hear you. I'm just saying, like, I think folks game to game are like, oh, well, maybe this can happen, or oh, they did this terrible. Is this gonna carry over to the next game? Like, y'all, we have enough evidence to see what these guys are. The question isn't whether like they're gonna get better, is whether they can win with the inconsistency that they have. And I mean, Cadeau's a pretty good example of it, because for me, it feels like the foul trouble is always an issue with him. And it feels like when he gets in foul trouble, he tries to overcompensate for the foul trouble by making like these amazing plays. And part of it is just knowing your personnel. I mean, Van Allen Lubin has caught, his share of balls and dunked, but there's been quite a few where he hasn't. So you just got to kind of know who you're throwing to, and you have to adjust the kind of pass, to your personnel. I think that's part of it. And then sometimes you just got to be more locked in. That sounds cliche and it sounds easy and it sounds like something that should be automatic, but there are times when it just looks like he's just not 100% like focused on the task at hand. Maybe he's thinking, 2 or 3 plays down the road, but that's where he's at right now. And I think it can improve. I mean, hey, he hit what was essentially the game-winning layup.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's a positive because he was in a situation earlier this year where he had basically the exact same layup and he missed it.
Yeah.
So that is some level of growth, I suppose. So you just have to hope that these guys have, positive nights and that the assists. I think he was at 4 and 4. If he
Yeah,
can
and
just
he was roughly, I think he was 6-6 against Clemson. So I mean, it's
right. So
it's feast or famine, man.
And I'm going to contradict myself because now I'm like, well, he can do better than that, and I think he realizes that there's just one or two possessions a game where it's just not, that focus just isn't there. And if you just eliminate those one or two, then he's at 6-3, and you can 2-1 isn't great, but you can live with it. So I think it's just focus, but I don't expect any change. I think this is just kind of where things are.
Yeah, and it's crazy because obviously you'd live with the good of him, but to your point, when he's having foul issues and he's turning the ball over, that's where it's really handicapping North Carolina. And this isn't necessarily a dig at the kid, but North Carolina looked better against Syracuse when he was out. I don't know if it was spacing or the fact that it meant that they had to give some other guys some minutes more, but it was insane just how much more fluid they looked the minutes that he came off the court. And I,
well, in this particular game, it has to be about the shooting, right? Because they're not
true
particularly threatened by his ability to shoot from three. But then Ian had hit it. He had 3 in the first half and 2 in the second half. So if Cadeau is out and RJ's at the 1 and Ian's at the 2, then you can't help off of the 1 or the 2 because one guy has a reputation of being a great shooter and still made 3 threes in the game, and the other had already hit 3 in the first half. So that opens up stuff. And then you had Withers on the other side who had hit 3 as well. So when you have those 3 in the game, when you have 3 guys hitting threes, it makes it just so much harder to defend everything. And that's probably why in this particular game the offense looked better, because there wasn't that person to sag off of Cadeau and help on RJ, double RJ, fight through, traffic to make sure that whoever was left over, that Cadeau was left open, they could just roam. So I think that's probably what it was.
Yeah, and to my point about Cadeau, we've talked all season about North Carolina being small, not just on the front court, but their guards are small. When you're going at a lineup of Cadeau and RJ Davis together, I mean, it's really easy for those guys to just run in, try to shoot a layup, and get blocked. And we've seen that a lot this year. So when they do have either he or RJ in, it does give them an opportunity, I think, to maybe speed the game up. And Sean, I want to ask you: is there something North Carolina can do over these last couple of weeks to gimmick a way to speed the game up? Because what you saw against Syracuse was a higher paced game. And as we've talked about before, when you have a higher paced game, you can tolerate turnovers, and because you're getting more possessions out of it. But I also think, again, Elliot Cadeau is better when the game is sped up. I think RJ Davis is better when the game is sped up. How can Hubert Davis and his staff gimmick some ways to speed the game up and maybe steal some possessions as we get down to the last 6 games of the year here?
Well, it's definitely going to be tough to do that this week, given the 2 teams they're playing, NC State and then UVA, in terms of their tempo. NC State in the 300s, UVA pretty much dead last. So I could easily see both of these games being in the low 60s from a possession perspective. So, NC State, I think for Cadeau will ideally be a little easier than UVA. But, from the 18 minutes he played against Syracuse, that might be the minute distribution that needs to happen in certain games where you do have RJ Davis, who has now been shooting close to 37% from 3 in ACC play. Not his 40% plus, but still, definitely better than what it was early in the season in the 20s. And to Sherrell's point, you have Ian Jackson or Joey Powell. So once again, we're kind of talking about 2 people now in terms of the non-shooters, Elliot Cadeau and Trimble. I think the minute allocation has to make sense for those 2. But in terms of pushing the pace, a lot of it, what we're talking about, comes from that defensive pressure where UNC under Hubert Davis has not done a good job, or even an average job, of forcing turnovers to get out in transition, which you did see with Ian and some others. But also for Cadeau, where are there plays to make the highlight passes that make sense. And one of them was coming out of the, to start the second half with the alley-oop to Van Allen Lubin. And there are a few other set plays that you saw happen throughout the game. So, it's almost, you do want the maximum possessions, but also knowing this week that it's going to be in the low 60s with the style of play that NC State and UVA have. But with NC State, I think there's still opportunities for Cadeau to get out and be aggressive, especially at home where you have the crowd behind you.
I appreciate you playing along. I know we've tried to figure out, are there things North Carolina can do to speed the game up, but now I think they're at the point where it would have to be a gimmick. It's not necessarily defensive intensity because I don't think they have it. They haven't shown that they have it. And that's where, to your point, whether it's play calling, whether it's run and jump, and to all the folks who say during the games, and this isn't me talking down to anybody, but I see people a lot that want North Carolina to press the entire game. They can press some, but I think Sherrell and I made the comment yesterday, like the one time North Carolina, I can remember them doing a half-court trap where they ran and trapped the ball handler in the short corner by the coach's box. North Carolina immediately didn't recover, and they got a dunk out of it. And I think that's just because North Carolina has deficiencies in size and not having that true rim protector, despite how much better Jae'Lyn Washington has gotten at blocking shots. Sherrell?
I have a topic that kind of segues off of that, and we can dive into it if we want to. But for me, the other thing that's important about this time of year is that, like, the season's almost over, so you don't have to worry as much about people's feelings. And I think we're seeing that a little bit from Hubert Davis and the staff. Like, we can all acknowledge, and I know everybody says, "Oh, you earn your minutes in practice," which is partially true, but there are other things involved in, like, who plays and how much they play. There are some things you have to consider whether you like it or not as a head coach, and I think UNC definitely did that. There's egos, there's shots, and now there's probably salary involved. Like, there's a lot of stuff that goes into who plays, why they play, and all that stuff. At this point, isn't it kind of like shouldn't the head coach and the staff feel free to kind of just put whoever's out there and they don't have to worry about feelings? Like, we know that there are multiple guys who aren't going to be back next year because the eligibility is gone. We know there's probably going to be some guys who go to the NBA. We know that there's probably going to be some people who transfer because that's what happens at every school now. So, like, I'm asking y'all, like, if you were the head coach, wouldn't it be time now to say, okay, we placated you, we made our promises, and now we're going to do, not saying that they weren't doing what was best for the team, but they're going to do what's best for the team now. And it might not include playing, my favorite person, player X. It might not involve playing player X 38 minutes a game like player X is used to. Do y'all think that's fair?
Sean, have you and Sherrell ever seen The Waterboy with Adam Sandler? Do y'all remember Brent Musburger and Dan Deerdorf's lines during every single game? Dan Deerdorf's like, well, they got to go for it here. There's nothing else left, and that's literally what's running through my head right now. Well, Brent, they've got to really go for it now. There's no sense holding back. Sean, I'll let you answer too.
No, I think what Sherrell said makes sense, and in my mind, it's been more of when we do get to the portal season of kind of who comes and who stays and who goes. But yeah, I mean, at this point, for the most part, even though kind of internally we've probably been so frustrated with UNC, when you do look at any of the, the bracketologies, et cetera, they're still in the ball game, so to speak. Obviously, there's a lot to do to get in, but at this point, especially if you're the coaching staff, you got to go down fighting as much as you can. So you do want to play the guys that you feel most comfortable with. To me, the hard thing is that each game is a little different in terms of who's coming to play and who can you count on this game. And even yesterday with Cadeau playing 18 minutes, having, over the course of the week, 10 turnovers, when they did put him on the free throw line, he hit that jump shot, which I think is what I've always wanted him to be more comfortable taking, now more off the dribble, the 12 to 15 footer, but he did hit that one. And then as we talked about, went hard to the basket and got the, when it went from 2 to 4 points. But I think that goes to, once again, something similar to 2 years ago of the coaches having to have their finger on the pulse of exactly how guys are doing that game and who's coming in, who's coming out. But I think from a minute distribution, I did like how yesterday's went. RJ was playing, the iron 5 minutes, and I think over the past few weeks he's gotten closer to what we always expected from him, and he hasn't really been forcing the issue as much while knocking shots down. So fine with him playing that, and then ideally you have Ian if he continues to play well, getting into the 30 plus. But nobody else has earned that right, and I think it has to go by a game to game basis on how the feel of the game is going.
And that's what I mean. Like it should be a game to game thing. There should be a quicker hook when people don't do what they're supposed to. Earlier in the season, I think you use that as a teachable moment, as a time to learn. But that time's over now. Like you are in do or die. Every game is essentially an NCAA tournament game because if you lose, you're not going. So you have to kind of treat every game like an elimination game. It's game 7. Like I'm going to miss cliches here, but all the arms are available. The starter who started 3 games ago, he can come in and give you an inning. The reliever who has 3 straight saves, he can come in and give you a batter. Like that's how you have to treat it, and that means that some people might not play as much as they're accustomed to, and I think that's okay. And I think they should be okay with that. And again, I'm not saying that UNC hasn't been putting, well, they haven't, but I'm not saying they purposely weren't putting guys in position to succeed all season. I'm saying now that you've recalibrated and you understand where you are, that egos and all that stuff is out the window, and it doesn't matter what's going to happen in a month with the portal or whatever. You just got to find a way to get into the tournament. And if that means playing Jalen Washington and Jae'Lyn Withers and Van Lumen together because it's working, then you do it. If it doesn't work and it means you have to play 5 guards, then you do it. Like you do whatever it takes to win that specific game that night. And then when it gets to be the next game, if it's a completely different lineup, so be it. But that's how things have to go if they want to try and get back into the tournament. And I mean, it's a long it's a long way to go to get there, but you have to do it like game by game. Another cliche, but for real, like Wednesday against NC State, that is for the season. If they happen to win that game, Saturday against Virginia is for the season. If they happen to win that game, so on and so on and so on.
It's I lied. It was also Dan Fouts, not Deerdorf, but it's last game. Can't hold anything back now. So it's also cue up Herm Edwards, right? You play to win the game, and hopefully you would think that since their proverbial backs are against the wall, that they could play a little more liberated. They could feel a little more free and not feel the pressure of pressing the right buttons at the wrong time, what have you. I would say if you're looking for the best way to try to get your team a win, I'd go to Johnny T-Shirt. I wouldn't try to scheme or play favorites. I would absolutely just go to johnnytshirt.com, or better still, go to East Franklin Street in Chapel Hill and visit Johnny T-Shirt in person. They're going to worry about your feelings. They're going to make sure you leave feeling great and feel like you're a big part of the program. But they're also going to make sure you win because you're going to walk out of there with the best selection of UNC gear, and you're going to save 10% off the top of their amazing prices with the code that you find on the Inside Carolina Premium message boards. That seems simple strategy to me. That seems like a guaranteed win. That seems like the way to punch your postseason ticket through Johnny T-Shirt. I really don't know how to boil it down any easier than that. For those of you watching us on video, stick around. You won't see anything, but if you're listening to us in audio, we're going to drop some national ads in here. Hang tight. We'll be right back on the Coast to Coast. Thank you all so much for being a part of the show tonight. We appreciate you being here live. If you're joining us in the chat, thank you very much. If you are not, if you're listening to us later on, we're still glad you're here. No big deal. I'm Joey Powell, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran are here with me. We're talking about Carolina basketball, as always, trying to do so in a way that makes sense as we try to make sense of a lot of things that haven't made a ton of sense. Fellas, coming up this week, North Carolina, as Sherrell said earlier, hosting NC State at home, hosting Virginia at home. Those are 2 games of teams that are way, way outside of the net. But I think the last time we said something like that, we were talking about a Stanford team that walked into the Smith Center and beat North Carolina, and really kind of started this major spiral. Sean, I'm asking you, what are you expecting to see against NC State and Virginia, other than the fact those teams are probably going to try to take the air out of the ball?
NC State obviously played earlier there, which really began their 10-game, I think 10-game losing streak in conference play before beating BC. But once again, with the rivalry, there's going to be the intensity. I think we saw in the second half of NC State what happens once the guards get confident. Now their guards aren't at the level that they were the past few years, but I think that goes to being locked in defensively, keeping them off the boards as much as possible. And, what Joey, actually, when you dropped off of, for me, looking at, okay, how many possessions offensively are they going 3 or more without scoring? If they can limit those, I think that's going to be the focus, where NC State a little more athletic, but a little probably looser in terms of the game. So your margin of error is probably a little bit higher versus UVA, who, I was shocked to see that they're actually, from an offensive perspective, ranked 6th or 7th in the ACC right now. So higher than UNC from an offensive perspective. Defensively, they've been not their usual Tony Bennett selves, but they've won 3 in a row. McNeely, obviously a very talented player. Day-Day Ames has been playing well. So, and they also play a smarter game. So in that one, the margin of error is going to be a little bit less, and you're going to have to capitalize on, once again, the tip out, some offensive rebounds, etc. But, with the ACC now, 2 games that if you win aren't going to do anything. If they lose, they're a death sentence for the most part, especially at home, which I think is just frustrating with the conference in general. But as much as they can, do a Cal performance of maximizing their effort offensively and defensively, but to me, I guess first and foremost, they get 2 guys, Ian and RJ, to score consistently together, and then by any means, can there be that third person that steps up from game to game?
Sherrell, I want to ask you how the North Carolina Tar Heels will match up, specifically who's going to guard Kihei Clark when UVA comes to town later this week.
Leakey's got him.
That's a great answer, because both those guys were in school for roughly 93 years.
There you go.
And it's crazy. RJ was in school longer than Leakey was, but we're sitting here making jokes about Leakey Black and Kihei Clark. Shirley, anything you want to see from this team that you feel like is going to guarantee them? I think the easy answer is, can they hit 3-point shots? But is there something even simpler for you?
Everything they haven't been doing well the entire season.
All right,
no.
Don't do the dumb, because the dumb is contagious. Don't do the dumb. That'll be Sherrell's answer.
And your favorite podcast doesn't talk about doing the dumb.
That's fair. Okay.
I would say tempo. Once you get into conference play, it's amazing how it happens every year. Sean talks about it every January, like 5th, that basically Carolina is this high-flying, high-tempo team, 76, 77 possessions. And as soon as conference play starts, it drops. It starts going to 72, and then it's 68. Then there's like a game where there's 61 or 62, and you're like, what is happening? So I looked up just quickly the last 6 times UNC and NC State have played. The number of possessions were 72, 68, 74, 63, 71, and 68. So kind of on average, I would say in the upper 60s. It needs to be in the 70s, I think, for UNC, because they are a deeper team, I think, than NC State. I think they're a better shooting team than NC State. And NC State has better bigs, however. We have to remember that Huntley Hatfield didn't play in the game in Raleigh, and he will play more than likely on Wednesday. So him and Middlebrooks are a pretty potent combination in the middle for UNC. So, again, to mitigate that, if they're going to have stretches where they play 3 smalls or 4 smalls or whatever, get out in the open court and run and tire those guys out so they can't camp out in the lane and block everything when you're trying to drive. So I would say for me, in both games, really, it's just tempo. Because even though this isn't a Tony Bennett UVA team for Saturday, I still think they don't really want to get out and run. So to me, that's the way you do it. Sean's talked about extra possessions through rebounding. You've talked about extra possessions, Joey, through defense and maybe some full court press every once in a while. Just that's the way to do it. Just get more possessions, shoot more, have more opportunities, get in the open court, tire them out, and then let your guards handle the last 5 or 6 minutes of the game. So for me, it's just tempo.
So, Sherrell, I think you do have also a good note on the status of one of UNC's signees for 2025, Isaiah Dennis. Give us an update there.
Oh, that was a left turn I was not expecting. Yes, I sure can.
Hey, man, look, I've got an agenda that I'm trying to roll with here, pal. Just play along.
Yeah, so he broke his pinky finger on December 14th in a game against Myers Park, and he's been out since. Had some rehab, just been working on it, still doing conditioning and doing some lower body work. But he came back earlier in the week for senior night. And then I guess Saturday was the third round of the Independent School Athletics Association's playoffs in 3A. He came back and was kind of without a minutes restriction. And he had 18 points and was 4 of 4 from 3. I think it was 5 of 6 from the field, or excuse me, 5 of 6 from the free throw line, 4 of 4 from 3. So he had a good first game back, or second game back, but first game where he played major minutes. So it's good to see him back and healthy. And then Caleb Wilson, this wasn't mentioned in the show notes, but he just led his team to another region championship. So they're en route trying to win a state championship. His team this year, Holy Innocents, the first time they've ever won 20 games, and he is kind of just racking up all the awards. He's going to the Iverson Classic. He's obviously in the McDonald's game. He was a region player of the year. So he's just having a phenomenal senior season. He also collected his 1,000th rebound a couple weeks ago. So he's not this season, career 1,000th rebound.
Not this season. That'd be a record.
That'd be like 45 rebounds a game. But he's just having a tremendous senior season, and you can see a lot of growth in some areas that we've talked about on the podcast that were areas for growth.
Yeah, I think that's strong. Go ahead, Sean.
Dixon, rolling through for Gonzaga. I think they have DeMatha this week to round out the WCAC, which will be a pretty good game, and then it goes into their playoffs. So we'll be interested to see how that one goes, especially last year talking about Gonzaga was going to be top of the class in the league, and I think some of the listeners were saying Paul is sick, so we've still got another week or two to battle that one out.
And the one other thing, I'm sure we're going to talk recruiting on here a ton during the summer and then when the portal heats up. But the other thing I do like about this class that UNC has coming in, and I'm not the first one to say it, so I don't mean to take it as my own, but the positional size is definitely something that UNC hasn't had in a long time.
It's the opposite of this roster right now.
Yeah,
yes.
is very much. Isaiah Dennis is a legit 6'5", I think. In certain lineups, he could be a 3-man. He's still growing according to his dad, so he could be end up as a 6'6" type guy. And then Dixon is 6'3" ish, but he's well built, and he's just a real sturdy, solid guy. And then obviously Wilson is pushing 6'10", has a long reach, and is very athletic in certain aspects. So it's very different from the classes they've had the last few years from a positional size perspective.
Yeah, I think that's something that just keeps coming up in games, regardless of if it's other teams throwing bigger players at North Carolina's players in different positions, or if it's just that you keep seeing other teams having high block numbers in each game. Yeah,
like UNC had to put Drake Powell on J.J. Starling. It wasn't anything particularly wrong that Cadeau, Davis, and Trimble were doing. He's just bigger and stronger than those guys, and so they had to take their 6'6" wing, and I thought he did a really good job on him, even though Starling still got to the free throw line.
No, I think you'll take that. I mean, he's a great free throw shooter, but you'd rather have that than having him getting open mid-range looks or getting straight to the cup. And hey, saw R.J. Davis get a straight up block in the game against Syracuse, which, as we're sitting here talking about little guys, you gotta respect that. I think it was against Carlos, who was the smaller of Syracuse's guards, but you got to respect that when it's a straight up on ball block for a guy that's 6 foot even. Pretty impressive. Sherrell, last thing before we get to our 2 cents here. It seems like all of the chatter and kind of the noise that we were hearing around the North Carolina GM search has come to a screeching halt. And am I to assume that the fact there is very, very little, almost airtight, but the fact there's very little coming out about that, do you feel like that's by design? Is that a good thing, or what to you does it mean that there's no news about that?
I would say no news just means there's no news, and I wouldn't assume anything, positively or negatively. This is I try not to use the word interesting because it's a catch-all, but this is a interesting search.
Fascinating,
whatever
intriguing
you want to use. Intriguing, yes. Keep them going. But they hope to have it done in the next 2 or 3 weeks. They have to have it done in the next 2 or 3 weeks to help with all the stuff that's going to have to happen with the portal and recruiting and all that stuff. But unfortunately, there's just not an update. I could make up one and say that Sean applied, but that wouldn't be true. so I don't want to make up anything. So
who do you think wrote his cover letter? I wrote his cover letter. I mean, let's be real about this.
Yeah, so
Sherrell,
I think the news is just that there's not a ton of news.
let me ask you this, and again, I know there's not a lot to base this off of, so I want you to just talk from your opinion. Do you see a way that North Carolina could get someone hired and have them started by the time the portal opens?
Yeah, for sure. The portal opens, for those who don't know, March 24th, so just over a month from now. But yeah, I think they could have somebody in, especially if it's somebody who doesn't have any other responsibilities right now, or somebody who lives kind of in that world already. So yeah, they could have somebody in and ready to go by then.
Sorry.
The issue is though, is that the work should be happening now.
Yeah.
So even if you have somebody in the day of the portal opens, you're already behind.
Yeah.
If you're, the whole, if you're on time to a meeting, you're late.
You're late.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
I mean,
well,
it's not like you're just, sorry, Joey, jumping in and like, here's the directive, because you do have to communicate with the coaching staff and understand, to an extent, what players that are going to fit the system. Obviously, your task is to run the system and take some of those conversations off. But yeah, to your point, I think Eric Bossi put in the thread this week when people were talking about JT Toppin for Texas Tech, and he was saying, he was well locked up before he even hit the portal. So there's a lot of those situations happening already, as well as now and over the next month.
I mean, Carolina's opponent in the Sweet 16 got a commitment the day before the Sweet 16 game last year, and I mean that's just how it works now. I would say too, Carolina's done it before too. I won't name him, but there's a player that Carolina pretty much had ready to go once they entered the portal, and that's not anything wrong per se. It's just that's how business is done in 2025, and if you don't do it, you're behind. So you can choose to not do it, but you're going to end up with a flawed roster. So you just have to make a choice, and you have to accept the reality that you're in.
Sorry, Joey. Last thing. You mentioned Alabama, and once again, I hate using them as an example, whether it's on the court, how they play offensively, or in the portal. But when people enter the portal, whether it is the back channeling, but they also know what type of players they're looking for, and they're hitting them aggressively and hard, and then they're getting them on campus, and they understand the type of athlete, the type of offensive player that they're looking for. So there's no real wasted movement for them. And I think that's what UNC has got to get to, so that you're not one of those teams that, come the G League camp or the NBA Combine, unless it's a nice to have. I think we saw how much those salaries go through the roof now versus maybe Pete Nance or Cormac Ryan just 2 years or a year ago.
I always feel like I know this is turning into portal discussion, and we're a month early, but whatever. I always feel like the teams who you see are, they've been interested, they have interest in like 27 guys. I always feel like those are the teams that maybe aren't doing the best job, because if you're doing a great job, you have maybe 14 guys, 12 guys, depending upon your needs, that you've already scouted. You already have their number. You've already talked to their agent. The agent's already talked to the mom. The agent's already talked to the dad. The agent's already talked to the high school coach. And so all that stuff is lined up. They enter the portal. They get a call from the head coach. They say, come on a visit. They say, hey, look, everything's lined up. You good? You ready to do this? Cool. Signed, done. And that's how the portal has to work for everybody. Because if not, if you're not doing it, somebody else is doing it to get an advantage on you. So you have to do it, whether you like it or not. And
you can't wait until the night before the prom to ask a girl out. Like, you got to have your prom date lined up ahead of time, because she's getting eyeballs from all over the place. You got to have a lot of things lined up before prom night. And if you're sleeping, you're going to be going stag. So
one last thing, I'm sorry. That's why I don't like the speed dating analogy, because if you're speed dating, you're not doing it correctly. You shouldn't be speed dating. You should have already,
it's not volume.
Like I said, you should have already done that legwork that you call speed dating a month ago, so you wouldn't have to do speed dating, so you have a better idea of how that player might fit into your system. So I've never liked when people say speed dating. To me, that's kind of a red flag.
Yeah, it's not volume. It's more of, and I hate to use the violence and gun analogy, but you're not shooting a howitzer, you're not shooting an elephant gun, you're shooting a sniper rifle. and that's where it's going to be a lot more effective for Hubert Davis and the staff and whoever the GM is as they head into this portal season very, very soon. All right, guys, last thing before we get out of here, we're going to do our 2 cents brought to you by Congruity. I want to make sure that everybody knows that Matt at congruityhr.com, that's your email address. That's your ticket. That's your plan on acquiring the players or the keys or the strategies that are going to make your work, red, small, or medium-sized business, better, right? That's going to make your team better. We're talking about, the portal and how you identify targets. Well, you need to identify Matt at Congruity and let him help you plan out how you can save money through small or medium-sized business. Congruity is going to find ways to help take care of your back office stuff. Usually this includes your benefits, your payroll, your HR, the type of things that really bog down a small or medium-sized business owner. You want to be focusing on acquiring new business. You want to be focusing on closing leads. You want to be focusing on generating leads, all of that stuff. And you really, really need to reach out to Congruity HR. If they can't help you, they'll tell you they can't help you. And it's a free assessment so you haven't lost anything. So we want you to show the love to Congruity the same way that Congruity shows love to Inside Carolina's content and shows love to, basically IC, all the stuff we do here. So it's good stuff. They're good people. We want you to love them the way that they love us. All right, guys, give me 2 pennies. Sherrell, you're going first with a penny tonight. Let's go.
What I have, Jae'Lyn Washington, obviously it's been an up and down year for him, but he's had 2 or more blocks 7 times this season, and in conference games he has the second highest block percentage in the ACC. So he is providing some rim protection for UNC.
It's a good stat, Dano.
That was a big, it's a big question mark heading into the season. So he is doing that at least a little bit.
If I had a ding like the Dan Patrick Show, I would absolutely ding you there. That was well done. Sean, give me a penny.
Sherrell talked about in terms of what's going to happen in a month with some players graduating, some players transferring, other players MBA. Whatever happens with Ian and Drake, there could only be a month left, and we talked about them for years coming up, so it could go by pretty quick. But really for Drake, he's been playing consistent minutes, 22 to 26 lately. Last 2 games, 6 assists, 0 turnovers. The offense has been a little up and down, but to me, just excited to hopefully watch his continued growth over the next few weeks, both offensively and defensively. Offensively, I think he can still contribute a little more just from some of the cutting and be a little more aggressive off the ball. And then defensively, rebounding, I think he can still make a mark. He's only getting 2 or 3 rebounds a game, so I think that's something easy for him to work on. In addition to, I think we started to see the blocks and steals come up a little bit. I know that was mentioned in Jonathan Gavoni's ESPN mock draft lately, but can he continue to improve little by little? Not saying that he's going to turn into that third scorer they need, but in terms of somebody that earns those minutes and is consistent, I'm hoping that he can be, continue to show that growth.
Yeah, and I know North Carolina fans don't really know what to expect from he and Ian Jackson, and obviously as we get information about that, we'll let you know. But just assume that this might be the last chance you get to see those guys. And like Sean said, we've talked about them so much. We've talked about them for years, and yet we've only had like 5 months of time watching them play. So yeah, North Carolina fans, I know the season hasn't been what everybody expected it to be, but definitely make sure you're getting the most out of watching those 2 guys in the event that they're not on the roster next year. All right, guys, thank y'all so much. Appreciate you making time. Shout out to everybody who joined us in the chat tonight. Love that you guys are involved with the show. Sorry we didn't get to any questions this evening, but sometimes that's just the nature of the way the show goes. But we hope that you guys have a great week. Hope that you enjoyed the show. If you don't, let us know. Email ben@insidecarolina.com or shoot something to me, joey@insidecarolina.com. Give us some feedback. Let us know what you're thinking. Drop us a nice review or a rating. If you're listening to us as a podcast, we'd appreciate that. And, of course, subscribe everywhere. Hammer the subscribe button. Be all over it. Make sure that you're getting all the content, whether it's from us. I mean, Greg broke the news this week about North Carolina looking at North Campus for a new arena. Tommy has been all over these post-game shows, but they're doing some really good breakdowns now with Staples doing write-ups of all the transfer class stuff that UNC got for football. And, hey, the baseball team started with a 3-game sweep of Texas Tech and the Bosch this week. So there's a lot going on. Shout out to the UNC women's basketball team. knocked off NC State at home. I believe that they swept State this year, I think is right.
They only played one. They only played one time.
Oh, they only played one time. Well, they still swept them. Why you correcting me, bro?
Yeah, they beat Duke too.
So I mean, the North Carolina women's team, showing a lot of moxie. So just make sure you're following all the Inside Carolina stuff. We try to give you guys the best content you can find anywhere, not just your favorite podcast. But until next time, for Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran, shout out to John Siegley for producing, to Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity for sponsoring. Until next time, I'm Joey Powell. This has been the Coast to Coast Podcast on InsideCarolina.com. Y'all take it easy.